I'm just curious about the Hajj in Mecca. That photo that you had of the tower overlooking the ancient religious site, is that where people walk around? Okay.
Yes. Yes. So.
But how can they? There are so many people.
Yeah. So I have done that. I've done the circumambulation of the Kaaba. You do it 7 times.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
If there's anybody who doesn't want to be filmed, let me know.
So towards the end, you talked about the coupling of the U.S. dollars and the Saudi riyal. It sounds like, I'm not sure, it sounds like that was done on purpose, intentionally, or it just happens that way?
No, it's on purpose. It's on purpose. It's an unspoken policy. And I mean, the one thing that the Saudi Arabia created was their central bank is the Saudi Arabian Monetary Agency, or SAMA, and so there's they try to keep they try. I mean, what you do is you look at the rates, and it's not fixed because it does vary a little bit. You know, I've seen it go to 3.73 or 3.76. So we know it's not fixed, and officially it's not fixed, but they adjust things so that it tracks the U.S. dollar very closely.
Yeah, could you say a few more words about why Saudi Arabia is bombing Yemen and why they've taken the side they have against the Houthis and what that sort of is all about? And where does the U.S. come into that?
Sure. So the Saudis are since 2015, although there have been some skirmishes before that, have been bombing Yemen very intensively since 2015, and it has created a humanitarian crisis. At least 10,000, I'm sure it's more than that, people have died in Yemen. The reason for that is because it's part of the Iran-Saudi rivalry. That's one part of it, and that is because the Houthis are backed by Iran, and so Saudi Arabia is very intent that a political grouping that is allied with Iran should not take power in Yemen. Now, why is Yemen so important? Yemen is not a member of the GCC. Yemen is not an oil producer. But of all the countries in the Arabian Peninsula, Yemen is the only country that is, in terms of population, about the same size as Saudi Arabia. So it's got over 30 million people now. So it's a big country. All the others, even Oman, are much smaller. So it's the only country that, if it were to become an ally of Iran, could pose a significant challenge to Saudi Arabia. The other factor is that the people of Yemen, and the people in that southwestern corner of Saudi Arabia, that is Jizan, that area, the people are very similar. So they have similar habits. There's a brotherly relationship that goes back, centuries between these peoples. Similar culture. Both people in Yemen and Jizan, for example, chew qat. Qat is a kind of, I don't know. It's not a tobacco, but it's very addictive, and it gives you a high but you put it in your cheek, and so you see men in this area with a big bulge in their cheek, and it's because they have qat, and they're chewing it. So there are a lot of similarities. So it is possible that what happens in Yemen could influence what happens in Jizan. So this is why Saudi Arabia is very adamant in its position with respect to Yemen. And what's at stake here is who will control Yemen. Right now, it's been divided, and even historically, from the 70s through the 90s, Yemen was divided into two countries. There was the PDRY, the People's Democratic Republic of Yemen in Aden, and then the Yemeni Arab Republic, headquartered in Sana'a. And Saudis, I think, played some role in maintaining that division, because then, if you have two Yemens, they had Egypt. Yeah. It's divide and rule. It was divide and rule. Yeah.
And the location of Yemen. Wait, if you're going to say something, you need to do it on the microphone.
Okay. So let me respond then to the comment about the location. So it's strategic. So Yemen is, as you say, it is strategic because it guards the entrance to the Red Sea, and the Red Sea, of course, is the way to get to the Suez Canal, and so it's very strategic in terms of shipping. But okay. You had a
I can
yeah.
speak.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Beginning of the Saudi House of Saud, as you were explaining, my dad used to say that there was a beginning when the oil companies came. They had a pact between themselves. We'll supply you with the defense of your country, and you supply us much as oil we need. And that has been going onwards.
Yes, absolutely. That's true.
That's
the
pact that has been done many years ago.
Right. Yeah.
It's still
No,
continuing.
President Roosevelt was directly involved in that.
Yeah.
And
They
and
need
made,
each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And made that commitment to defend the oil fields.
And Iran was a big power before the Shah was in power. They used to come and bow down to the king, and king would give them gold coins on special occasions. All these sheikhs would come and accept the king as a power. But then suddenly when the revolution happened and the things changed, and Iraq attacked.
Right.
And so a lot of things happened that they are now enemies.
Right.
And they're so powerful now.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah. So just to amplify on that this just goes to reinforce the notion in my mind that the root of the conflict, of the rivalry between Iran and Saudi Arabia is not a religious rivalry. Okay, it is a power struggle. It's a political power struggle. This is not about Shia versus Sunni. Don?
I'm not remembering what years it was that United States was interfering with what was happening in Yemen and was really trying to get I don't know if it's president of Yemen, prime minister, I can't remember the name of the head, the chief, the president of Yemen, and was interfering with the politics there and was trying to get the president to do their bidding, to allow soldiers in there, and things like that. And a lot of the population got very angry at what was happening because there was so much violence going on in Yemen. So I think that has also a lot to do with what's going on right now.
Yeah, the U.S. has a long history of involvement, meddling in every country,
All over the world.
everywhere in the world. Yeah.
So I actually have two questions. The first one is, especially recently, Saudi Arabia is now more obvious. I don't think they were doing it before, but now they are. They're like becoming in-your-face allies with Israel. And I've read many articles, I don't know if they are true or not, about alleging that the Saudi royal family are originally Zionist Jews from Medina, originally from Medina, from the time of the Prophet Muhammad, and they opposed him initially, and etc., etc. So I don't know if you know about that, and if there is a truth to that.
Yeah, no, I've heard these stories. I don't have any way of verifying them. I'm sort of skeptical that they are real. But it doesn't matter. I mean, this is a long time ago. What is driving, Saudi government policy now, is what's happening today, not the origins of the potential origins of the Saudi royal family.
But why did they all of a sudden drop the Palestinians? They don't seem to care about us anymore.
Okay, so Saudi Arabia has. It's not a question of dropping the Palestinians or the Palestine issue. Saudi Arabia has always been two-faced about it, right? So Saudi Arabia has I mean, if you look at the 1967 war, 1973, and Saudi Arabia took a very, at least overtly, a very decisive stand in defense of the Palestinians against Israel. Okay, and Saudi Arabia has long had certain policies that I would regard as racist. So for example, the Saudi policy on granting visas is that a visa will not be granted to a Jew. Okay, so here's the thing. When you apply for a visa to Saudi Arabia, you have to state not only your nationality, but also your religion. Okay, so if you write Jewish on the visa application, you will not get a visa. Okay? Now, I go to Saudi Arabia and I meet people with names like Goldberg and Stein, okay, because they wrote on their passport or they wrote on their visa application Christian, right? So, but this is Saudi policy. Now, consider this. Of all the countries in the Middle East, I mean, Palestinians have one of the highest unemployment rates, right? So Saudi Arabia, which needs labor, they could have brought lots of Palestinians, right? But they don't. They never have. They have never brought large numbers of Palestinians to work in Saudi Arabia. They've been very, very careful about it. And I mean, there are other reasons too, because Palestinians, since certainly after 1948, have been much more politically active than other Arabs. Okay, and so there was concern that Palestinians would engage in political activism while they're in Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia, has never wanted that, has never wanted anyone to take any kind of independent political action while in the country. And so Palestinians have been at some points they have been almost barred from entering Saudi Arabia.
But wait, both my parents were teachers in Saudi Arabia, and there were many Palestinians teaching in all over the Gulf, including Saudi Arabia. The Palestinians and Egyptians basically built Saudi Arabia.
Sure. No, a lot of Egyptians. So when I was there were a lot of Egyptians, but Palestinians we had very few, and there were some. But what I'm saying is that if they didn't have these restrictions, there would be a lot more Palestinians working in Saudi Arabia. Okay, so it's not absolute, and of course how many Palestinians they will admit has varied over time depending upon what their perception of the the potential risks are to them politically. So there is that. In terms of Saudi Arabia's official position with respect to Israel-Palestine. I mean, they have been fairly clear, but at the same time, because right now Saudi Arabia and Israel are on the same side with respect to Hezbollah, it's there is going to be collusion in that on that issue, and they don't want to. Again, it's not something they're going to point out. Okay, we're working with Israel to block Hezbollah, but it's happening. It's happening behind the scenes. I mean, Saudi Arabia does a lot of stuff that is behind the scenes. It's like these are the kingmakers, and they're manipulating things from behind, and they're providing the money. And so the thing that we really need to track is, where does the money go? Where are the Saudis putting money? And they've done certain things. For example, like they have long been one of the major supporters of UNRWA, okay, and because they don't see it as having a political backlash, to keep the Palestinians and Gaza, surviving at a bare subsistence level is not a bad thing to them. But in terms of would Saudi Arabia fund a Palestinian political organization? No, it would not. Okay, so I think. Well, okay.
Okay, back to Yemen for a minute. Is there a religious problem between the Houthis and the Republican government, or whoever the guy that was in charge in the beginning? In other words, I understand Houthis are Shia. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. And others are not so Sunni. Are they? Is there a religious piece to this?
There is a divide there in the sense that the Houthis are Shia, and most of the others in the officially recognized government are Sunni. But it's not totally that way. So the Houthis had alliances. They still have alliances with Sunnis. Okay, one of their major allies was Ali Abdullah Saleh, okay, the former president of Yemen, who was deposed in the 2011 Arab Spring. And Ali Abdullah Saleh has switched sides. He's switched sides several times, and for a number of years he was an ally with the Houthis, and then he switched sides, and then the Houthis killed him for switching back to the government in Aden. So my take from that is that it is not, even though there are mostly Shia on one side, namely the Houthis, and mostly Sunni on the other side, but it's not exclusive. So it's not that the Houthis will not work with Sunnis. It's not that the government will not work with Shias. Okay, so since there is this crossover, it cannot be. The motivation for the conflict cannot be a religious one. At its root, it's not a religious conflict.
I just wanted to make a comment that when the Oslo Accords were signed, the war criminal terrorist apartheid state of Israel were getting into all kinds of commerce with many different Arab countries. So that Saudi Arabia is engaging with Israel now, it's nothing new. I am thinking, though, that one of the reasons that Israel is interested in working with Saudi Arabia is because they're trying to steal the gas resources that are off of the coast of Gaza that they are trying to claim. And I'm thinking that maybe they need the expertise of the Saudis to mine that gas.
No, the main oil company that is involved in the offshore natural gas fields off of the Gaza coast is Noble Energy. It's not a Saudi company.
I wonder what your views are on the relationship between the assassination of Khashoggi and the internal power struggle going on within the royal family.
Yeah. So Khashoggi was murdered, of course, because of his being in a position where he was not only outspoken but also visible. I mean, being a reporter for the Washington Post. I don't know that there is a direct relationship between his murder and the internal power struggle. I would think that even if the opponents within the royal family, let's say a son of King Abdullah, were in power, he probably would do the same thing. Okay, maybe not with that much boldness, but I can well imagine that a son of bin Abdullah would try to in some way silence Khashoggi. So in that sense, I don't see it as being part of the power struggle. Any other questions?
I'll ask one more. Okay, so this is about the alliances between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia. The U.S. also had that in the 80s had strong alliances with Iraq. Then the U.S. changed its mind, and I would think it's at the urging of Israel, because Iraq became a threat to the state of Israel. So all of a sudden the U.S. went and invaded Iraq, and the Middle East in general has not been the same ever since. So in my mind, the U.S. is never to be trusted, because there is no such a thing as the U.S. government as a friend. Today it's your friend if you serve its purposes. But tomorrow it will turn upon you, as history indicated so many times before. What is your thought?
Yeah, so I mean, how the United States government, looks at a country depends upon what role that country is playing in the larger geopolitical perspective with respect to U.S. interests, or the U.S. perception of its own interests. And I emphasize that because what is really an interest of the American people, or even of the country, can often be different from that so-called perception of U.S. interests. I mean, just like the notion that the U.S. had to invade Iraq, or to invade Afghanistan. In the long run, we know it didn't serve U.S. interests. I mean, it just created more chaos, more a quagmire that would drag down U.S. troops indefinitely, and give rise ultimately to ISIS. In terms, I mean, if you look at the first Gulf War, the perception, I don't know that it is so. I mean, it's partly about Israel, because Israel was, of course, very much an adversary of Iraq. I mean, they carried out the attack on the Iraqi nuclear reactor in 1981. But I think the main driver of that was that if one country, which was already showing some political independence, tries to take over a major oil field, namely the oil fields of Kuwait, what is to stop it from going further? I mean, there was always that calculation that, well, I mean, are they going to move on to Saudi Arabia? Are they going to move on to Qatar? And so there are also those. I mean, we can also imagine that these are concerns that a U.S. administration would have. Certainly the Saudis, from the Saudi perspective, it was a threat to them because it's a change to the status quo. Kuwait was a member of the GCC, and Iraq was not, and so they came out very, very decisively against the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, and the only way to respond to it, Saudi Arabia at that time did not have the military power to fight the Iraqis, so it had to be a U.S.-led coalition to respond to it. I'm not saying it was right, but that was the Saudi perception, and so the Saudi perception was a big driver in getting the U.S. to respond militarily.
But hadn't you said that Saddam Hussein had wanted to change the petrodollars to petro-euros? And so I think that was, I didn't know about that, so I think that was also a very major drive for United States to invade Iraq, just like what they did to Libya.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's one of a number of reasons. I don't say it is the major reason, but I think it was a reason because the Saddam Hussein was acting independently in other ways that was uncomfortable to the U.S. administration, even though some suggest that he had a green light from the U.S. to invade Kuwait. So it's also consistent with the notion that a crisis is also a pretext to invade, that the U.S. is looking for a way to get its foot in there, and when there is a crisis, it has a pretext to invade, and then when it invades, after the invasion, after the fighting is over, it has a decisive role in the post-war outcomes. How do you want to restructure it after the war? Just like, it had the full say about a post-war Japan. By being the victor, it could make those decisions unilaterally.
Well, wasn't Kuwait carved out of Iraq, and wasn't Kuwait drilling the oil wells that belonged to Iraq, and Iraq was going in and to tell them to stop doing it?
Well, that's the allegation. But we're talking about oil fields that are spread over a large area. So there's only so much lateral drilling that you can do. Even if you laterally drill, you're going maybe a few kilometers laterally. That isn't that far. I mean the Basra oil fields are much larger than that. In terms of what was the other?
Wasn't Kuwait carved out of Iraq? Because in the 1800s, with the Sykes-Picot Treaty, the whole entire Middle East was carved up by France and England.
Right.
No.
Sure, it was, but a lot of this is in dispute. So I mean, if you ask Saudis and you ask Iraqis, you're going to get different answers. There's the neutral zone, right next to Kuwait, which is, I mean, it's a neutral zone because it is disputed, and so the point is that it's been an independent country, and it controls those very important oil reserves, and I think the world powers felt that it's you don't transfer ownership of large oil fields through a war. I mean, unless it was a U.S. war, right? So it was sort of out of the U.S.'s control, right? If Iraq is going to control the outcome of it, and plus it was also disrupting oil production, right? Because Kuwaiti oil fields were put out of operation for a period of time.
Yeah, and then the United States found all its oil fields under Iraq's soil.
Kuwait is still a rich country.
Oh, yes.
It gives all its citizens a lot of benefits, just like Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
It gives them education and benefits for each child. I know a family who just keeps making children just to get the benefits.
Yes. So all of these,
Rich country.
all of these oil-rich countries. So of the GCC states, right? 4 of them are major oil exporters, right? Kuwait, Emirates, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. So Bahrain has some oil fields, but they're a very, very small producer. And Oman has discovered new oil, so their production is going up, but it's still very small compared to the others. Okay.
Bahrain is a base.
The when they killed Gaddafi, he was and many say this is the reason they started the whole unrest in Libya, and they took Gaddafi out of power and killed him because he was going out of away from U.S. hegemony on using the dollar, and he was trying to establish a unified African currency backed by actual gold and not depend on the U.S. dollar.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah, I mean, the U.S. has decided on regime change for any government that is showing this kind of staunch independence from U.S. policy, and so that's certainly the case in the case of Libya. I mean, there was a lot of demonization of Muammar Gaddafi over many years, so it was not something sudden, but we could see this coming, that the United States wanted regime change in Libya. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.